Okay, good evening and welcome to tonight's webinar on initial results on rock art surveys in the Serranía de La Lindosa, Colombian Amazon, which will be presented by Phil Riris. Before we start, I'd just like to give you a little bit of background to this talk. This webinar is organized by the Scotland's Rock Art Project, which is a 5-year program working with communities across the country to record, research, and raise awareness of prehistoric rock carvings in Scotland. The project is funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council and is run by Historic Environment Scotland in collaboration with Edinburgh University and Glasgow School of Art. And we are very grateful to Glasgow School of Art tonight for hosting this webinar on their Zoom account. Some of the Scotland's Rock Art Project team are here in this evening, so I introduce everyone. So I'm Guillaume. I am the co-investigator for the project, and tonight with me we have Tertia, who is the principal investigator of the project. We have Linda, our data analyst, and also moderating this webinar. And we have Stuart Jeffrey, our core investigator from Glasgow School of Art. As this is the final year of the Scotland's Rock Art Project, we are running various events to promote and celebrate Scotland's rock art and the work of the project and of our community team. And tonight's talk is the 10th in a series of 12 webinars running throughout this year, one each month. The webinars are presented by experts from Britain and Europe on themes that are relevant to Scotland's rock art. You can find more details about the webinar series recordings of our previous webinars on our website events page. Just before I introduce tonight's speaker, there are just a few housekeeping things to be aware of. So we are recording this talk and we will post it on our website in a week or two. To avoid background noise, you will be muted throughout the webinar and your videos will be turned off. Please use the chat box if you want to talk to each other, to tell us where you are joining us from tonight, and to flag up any technical issues with the sound quality or anything. We would appreciate it if you could keep the chat appropriate and relevant. So please do not post any URL links or click on any URL links that are not posted by us, as they may be spam. If you want to avoid comments from the chat box popping up on your screen, you can keep the chat box open on the right-hand side of your screen during the talk. If you want to ask the speaker a question, please don't use the chat box, use the Q&A questions and answer box at the bottom of your screen. You can ask the speaker questions at any time during their talk, and I will put your questions to the speaker when they have finished their presentation. So chat box for chat and Q&A box for questions to the speaker. Okay, so now I'm delighted to introduce tonight's speaker, Phil Riris, to give a talk on initial results of rock art surveys in the Serranía de La Lindosa, Colombian Amazon. Phil Riris is a lecturer in archaeological and paleoenvironmental modeling at the Institute for Modeling Socio-Environmental Transitions, Bournemouth University, UK. He earned his PhD from the University of Southampton in 2015. Between 2015 and 2019, he held postdoctoral positions at the Institute of Archaeology, University College London, laterally a British Academy postdoctoral fellowship, as well as a visiting fellowship at the Sainsbury's Centre for Visual Arts, University of East Anglia. His research focuses on the social environmental relationships in the ancient past, in particular population history, food production systems, and landscape archaeology in tropical South America. He has also contributed toward rock art studies in the Amazonian and Orinocan lowlands. So, ladies and gents, please welcome Phil Riris.
All right, thank you, Guillaume, for that introduction, and thank you to the Scotland Rock Art Project team for hosting me. It's a real privilege to be talking here tonight, and as the wealth of institutional and funder logos imply, this isn't just initial results of surveys that I did during my British Academy Fellowship, but it builds on sort of a history of work in Colombia and Venezuela. So I'll be presenting some recent results of field work, but it's also more than that. It's a part of an ongoing effort to understand the rock art of Northern South America, entitled Connected Communities. So if I can move on. Right, there we go. So just to give you a little overview of this talk, in addition to what's in the event description, I'm going to split it roughly into 3 parts. So looking at the setting and the motivation for doing this work, doing this research, a brief sort of primer and introduction to rock art in Northern South America in general, glossing over a lot of detail because, as we'll see, this is an incredibly rich and diverse rock art record, rivaling any across the globe, in my opinion. I'll focus then in on the fieldwork that I completed in 2019 in La Lindosa in eastern Colombia, Colombian Amazonia. Before moving on to the key sites that I find interesting and particularly relevant to highlight what is going on in this part of the world, and focusing in even more into the actual content, the stylistic composition and the structure of the rock art. And then maybe in the last part, we'll go into a more sort of, if you like, speculative or forward-looking perspective on this record and try to see where we might go through the large-scale analysis of rock art inventories, something that I think resonates quite strongly with what Historic Environment Scotland is trying to do with the Scotland Rock Art Project. I hope it'll be of interest to you guys as well. And particularly focusing on the use of social network analysis and ecological network analysis to highlight some interesting properties of rock art inventories. So the motivation for this research really began with some work that we just started in 2015 in Venezuela, along the Middle Orinoco, highlighted here, where we were doing field work trying to understand the settlement history and chronology of the Middle Orinoco, particularly in its capacity as a sort of entrepot or some mercantile hub in the pre-Columbian era. Now, as part of this work, we also recorded a ton of really interesting and fascinating rock art, parts of which has been published in Antiquity. The paper should be open access, and I encourage you, I would encourage you, I'm the author, to go read it. But out of this grew my British Academy project, which seeks to understand on a much broader scale than just the Middle Orinoco, how Indigenous artistic communities formed and interacted in the past. So based on my prior work, looking pretty much only at Venezuela, it was evident that there is a large amount of shared large quantity of shared motifs, stylistic conventions, and what have you, across Northern South America and indeed beyond the region highlighted in this map. This isn't, I'm not the first person to notice this. There's the famous there's a famous publication by Ari Boumert about the so-called Orinoco interaction sphere. He actually calls it the lower Orinoco interaction sphere. So he's looking into the Guianas and the Caribbean in particular as well, but as I hope to show you, that there's argument for extending it beyond that as well, looking to the upper and middle Orinoco River, describes sort of broad curve here, cutting across Venezuela into Colombia, and then a little bit into northern Brazil, if by some definitions of the Orinoco. So I basically want to understand what the commonalities and differences are between sites within this regional rock art record, whether there are shared norms around the production and consumption of rock art, the kinds of places in which they appear in the landscape, and whether ultimately the kinds of relationships that we can study in the rock art record mirror real social networks in the past. So that's kind of the high level motivation. The setting itself is fascinating. The Orinoco interaction sphere, also called the intermediate area, quotes, is a hyper diverse part of the world in terms of ethnic diversity, linguistic diversity. Each of these colors on this map is a language family. So these aren't individual languages, these are whole families. Each of those colors is an Indo-European, is a Nilotic, is Semitic. You know, it's that scale. There are hundreds of languages in this region. The gray colors are language isolates. This part of the world has the highest number of language isolates, barring Papua New Guinea, per unit of area. And it also hosts one of the longest unbroken records of a human inhabitation in South America, sort of uninterrupted human presence since at least about 12,000 years ago. So this area is also interesting for lying at the confluence of other regions of similar diversity. To the north, you have the Caribbean. To the east, there's the Guianas. To the west, there's the Andes, and to the south, there's the rest of the Amazon, the central Amazon, and so forth. So, and the archaeology and hence the rock art of this region borrows elements across all of these different areas, and to me, it just sort of is crying out for analysis with network methods. But I'll get onto that in a little bit. We'll look at the record first. It also benefits from a very long history of study, starting at the very least with Alexander von Humboldt in the 1900s, dedicated expeditions to study the rock art by Theodor Koch-Grünberg. He produced a book called Südamerikanische Feldzeichnungen, which is precisely on the rock art record of northwestern Amazon. In the 1970s, a ton of excellent, highly detailed ethnographic work, not least by Gerardo Reichel-Dolmatov, an Austrian-Colombian, Colombian-Austrian, either of the two, anthropologist. Know a ton about the indigenous peoples of this region thanks to his efforts, and then also lots of synthetic work, particularly by Cornelius Dubela from the University of Leiden in the 80s, who was the first really to look at synthesizing the rock art record of such a vast region. And in fact, he cast his net much wider, although he grounds himself really in Guianese and Orinoco rock art. So there's a lot of data to draw on, even beyond just the sort of the sites I've been able to personally visit. Although they're impressive and interesting in their own right, there is a lot of legacy data around the sites too, which is great. A lot of published information to draw on. Not least among these are this recent publication by Carlos Castaño Uribe, a Colombian anthropologist who has been instrumental in getting the Chiribiquete National Park listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It should say site there, not SCI. I think I cut it off with the image there. So this is directly to the south of where I've been working in even more remote part of the Colombian Amazon, where there are the sites that are enormous in terms of their elaboration and density, sheer density and diversity of rock art. There's some choice motifs of human figures there on the right hand side. You know, massed warfare and rituals and what have you. So really, there is a fantastic record to draw on for comparison, which is one of the reasons why I was so keen to get out to La Lindosa in the first place. Zooming out even further, I will be talking about some very early rock art sites, potentially some of the earliest rock art sites in South America, certainly the earliest ones in northern South America. And alongside these sites, we have to consider other really early sites like Cerro Gavilan in Venezuela. There's early Holocene, about 9,000 years old site documented by Franz and Kay Scaramelli. Other sites, the famous Cueva de las Manos in southern Argentina is a iconic site. I think most people have heard of Cueva de las Manos, if not actually visited it, because it is a touristic site. And then other central Amazonian sites like Monte Alegre in Brazil, which actually has some stylistic overlap with the sites that I'm going to be talking about. So there's all these other locations around the tropics and within the tropics that are worth bearing in mind, I would say, when we look at the record of La Lindosa in its context. So just as a reminder, the star is the location of La Lindosa. La Lindosa is, well, as the name Serranía implies, it's an uplifted plateau. It's a highland zone in what is generally quite a low, flat country. And it's a tributary. It's along a tributary of the Orinoco called the Guaviare. It's the southernmost tributary of the Orinoco. The next rivers south, if you like, the Valpes and Isana, are tributaries of the Negro, which flows into the Amazon. So it's really on this kind of border zone between the Orinoco and Amazonian river systems. Further south, there's the Caquetá, which is relatively well explored, in fact, in the 70s by Colombian anthropologists and archaeologists. The Middle Orinoco sites are many that I have visited, and the Rio Branco are sites that have been visited by Brazilian scholars in the last few years. And indeed, there is a lot of active research in the region. And the legacy sites the sites in the Upper Negro are sites that I've collected from the legacy data that I mentioned earlier, so visited in the early 20th century by anthropologists. So this is the sort of more zoomed in view of the La Lindosa plateau. It's the point at which the Guayabero River meets the Ariari and becomes the Guaviare, and then ultimately flows into the Orinoco. There are more sites than listed on. I've grouped sites together just to keep it simple. But these are sort of the five principal overall groupings of sites: Puerto Lucas, Limoncillos, Cerro Barba, Cerro Azul, and Nuevo Tolima. Nuevo Tolima is a single panel, whereas sites like Puerto Lucas are 2 panels. Cerro Azul is something like 8 panels. You get the idea. The archaeology of the region is actually quite relatively well explored in Amazonian terms. It's my colleague Gaspar Morcoterios has been working there for a long time, studying in particular the archaeobotanical assemblages that have been coming out of the ground for a number of years. I just want to highlight this recently published paper called Colonization and Early Peopling of the Colombian Amazon during the Late Pleistocene and Early Holocene, in which they published the results of excavations in one of the rock shelters that has rock art, that bears rock art, where they retrieved, they were able to retrieve radiocarbon dates with a calibrated date range of around 12,000 years BP, years before present. So, and with a continuous record of occupation above that. So these are some of the earliest archaeological sites in the neotropical lowlands, and for this reason, we need to bear this in mind when looking at the rock art record as well. It's also interesting to consider that the botanical remains that they've been extracting from these excavations, a lot of the species are what are called hyperdominant species. So this is a concept that was discussed particularly in an Amazonian context a few years ago with this paper down here by Hans Tersteger and colleagues in Science. Hyperdominance in the Amazonian tree flora, where most of the tree species in the Amazon are composed of, most of the trees in the Amazon are composed of only a very restricted range of species, and of that restricted range of species, most of them have an economic or ethnographic use, known ethnographic use. And so if these sites, if sites like Cerro Azul have been used for 12,000 years, and we're finding, my colleagues are finding remains of plant manipulation going back that far, one has to start thinking about, well, to what extent is the Amazon rainforest a quote unquote natural rainforest versus how much of it is managed and impacted by human activity. So it's an exciting place. There's lots of exciting new results coming out all the time. It'll be interesting to see if these findings are replicated in other locations. But that's just to provide a general overview. In terms of my fieldwork, carried out a bunch of surveys, both opportunistic and systematic, in November 2019. By systematic, I mean the number of rock art sites are already known from before. Of course, I visited those, and in the course of interacting with locals and colleagues and regional specialists. We discovered that there were more guides, of course, not to mention our guides. We heard about more sites that we visited on the way to sites that were already known. And in total visited about 18 sites, so multiple panels between sites. Some of the panels, individual panels, are dozens of meters long. So that number 18 sites belies a much more nuanced picture. Some panels are just sort of a smear of ochre about sort of this size, where others go on for dozens of meters. Took at least a few hundred photos per site with a very fancy camera, resulting in gigabytes and gigabytes of data, as well as sort of in situ use of Dstretch. For those of you who don't know, Dstretch is an image manipulation algorithm that highlights, through the manipulation of different color in various ways, is very good at highlighting, in particular, faded or damaged or otherwise very faint motifs of panels of rock art. An example of which is on the right there. That under the naked eye, that panel is almost invisible, but by applying these filters, you can discern stuff that is really not apparent on first viewing. And then during field work, as well as after field work, we've been doing 3D photogrammetric reconstruction of these sites in order to provide a as complete picture as possible of their context in situ. And I was accompanied by my colleague Natalia Losada Mendieta in the center of the picture there, who was instrumental in getting all of this off the ground, because it's a highly challenging environment. Oh my Lord, it was some of the toughest fieldwork I've been on. Incredibly dense jungle, long treks, interesting wildlife. That little boa constrictor there fell on me as I was walking through some trees. It's only a baby, it's only about the length of your arm, but it's still quite a shock when you know that there are also some of the most venomous snakes in the world live in this part of the world. Luckily, that was just a sleeping baby boa. But yeah, hugely challenging environment, really interesting place to visit, and an interesting rock art record to boot. So just give you more of an idea of what is possible with Dstretch. This gives you a view of what we were able to achieve with some of these panels. The original highly faded, highly smudged out, but by filtering it in various ways, you can start to pick out these individual motifs in quite a compelling fashion. And this is something that in previous years simply would not have been possible, and sites like this either would have been missed or not, and not recorded, or simply glossed over because they're far too damaged to retrieve any information on. So that was great. That was one thing that was particularly great about deploying this live and in the field. You can get Dstretch on your smartphone now even, which is worth springing for if you're a rock art researcher like me. Just some key takeaway points about the sites themselves before I go into their content. So there's very little engraved rock art in the region. There's engraved rock art tends to occur in rivers, like physically located in rivers. The vast majority of motifs that I recorded here, because they're in upland locations, are in ochre. We have no direct dates on the rock art itself, while a number of the rock shelters that they appear in have been excavated, and there are a range of dates running from the contact era to the end of the Ice Age. No direct dating has been done on the rock art themselves. Now, this is because ochre doesn't contain any carbon. It's iron oxide, so you can't date the red ochre or the yellow ochre itself. There are a few places where it looks like the paint was executed with a plant-based latex and therefore may contain carbon of some sort, but I didn't want to risk damaging them by sampling them, and without, at least not without discussing it with my Colombian colleagues. The record is actively degrading. It is. We have no idea how much has already gone. The sites are vulnerable to lichen growth. The boulders and rock faces themselves are spalling through exposure. There is sunlight that is bleaching the ochre, and from time to time, as you might imagine, in a tropical forest environment, there is water running down the rock faces. So it's a record that we don't know how much, what its original shape was, and bearing in mind that the rock shelters were occupied intermittently for at least 10 millennia, we are likely missing a lot. So that's kind of, we need to bear that in mind as well when thinking about what we. Oh, and I should also mention some of these are touristic sites as well, and they're being visited. And if you search the hashtag, well, in this case, Nuevo Tolima on Instagram, you can be treated to lovely pictures of tourists climbing up into the rock shelters, touching the paintings with their greasy hands, and probably contributing to their degradation in their own way. The owners of these sites also clear vegetation around the sites to make them more accessible and therefore appealing to tourists. Which obviously, as you can imagine, exposes them to more sunlight and increases the rate of bleaching. So there's a lot going on, unfortunately. Right, so I think that just about provides an overarching context for the work. So I'm going to move on and drill down into three of the key sites, in particular Cerro Azul, Puerto Lucas, and Nuevo Tolima, three of the largest sites. And when I say large, I mean large. So these are some of the most impressive rock art sites that I've ever personally witnessed. They are huge. This is one panel among 7 in Cerro Azul. As you can see, geometric motifs predominate. A lot of these have counterparts or even copies elsewhere in the Orinoco interaction sphere, in particular these sort of subdivided geometric shapes, or these open geometric shapes of various kinds. A few of the representations of animals have clear parallels elsewhere in the sort of the broader region, the broader study area of northwestern South America. The representational motifs, so depictions of things that exist in the real world, they're both realistic. So you find ones that are realistic, that are sort of anatomically correct, as well as completely fantastical. There are a couple of motifs dotted around that resemble what certainly in Europe would be called therianthropes, so blends of human and animal characteristics. Just give you a different view on the same site. They're tremendous. I mean, the first time you see these, it's mind-blowing. It's absolutely staggering. And you can see at the bottom here, this sort of big smudge of red ochre is where the panel has been exposed to the elements and is being weathered and washed away. But with Dstretch, it's possible to pick out some motifs still even under all of this heavy weathering. But of course, Dstretch can't do anything for the spalling, for this sort of breakaway pieces of rock face that we'll never ever recover. So I'm desperately hoping that my next slide works. Linda, Guillaume, Stuart, and Tertia, let me know if it doesn't, because it's a video. Here goes nothing. So this is that running okay?
Yeah, it's working.
Fantastic. Oh, it seems to have slowed down. There we go. Right. So this is Nuevo Tolima. This is just a single panel site. It gives you an idea of the scale of the thing. Super high up as well, so almost 10 meters. Some of the motifs are 10 meters high in the air, which is really fascinating to consider how they actually physically did that, standing on shoulders or something. I don't know. Pre-Columbian scaffolding. We'll see. There are our guides looking incredibly bored by the whole thing. And similar to Cerro Azul, you can see that there are a variety of different geometric motifs, realistic animal motifs, humans, etc., etc. There's some of that water damage that I was mentioning. Yeah, so that gives you an idea of Nuevo Tolima. I think I have some stills of it. Yep, some stills as well. So there is a tremendous diversity of animal life represented in the rock art, including the boa constrictor that I mentioned earlier. There's its great granddaddy executed in ochre on the rock face. The boa features quite extensively in native cosmology and myth in northern South America, as well as the anaconda. There's a jaguar there, another alpha predator of the region that clearly has a reputation as being a man-eater. Fierce predator that features prominently in lots of myths across the region. There's a capybara or something like a capybara. There are numerous rodents that come in different sizes in the region. The capybara just being one of the largest, but it could also be a nutria or something like that. And then potentially over there, just beneath that picture, the black vulture, the South American black vulture, or drying its wings, or a falcon or something. These birds are very often associated with shamanistic practice. There is when shamans ingest hallucinogens or the like, they will often go on vision quests with vision quest like things, rituals in which they metaphorically transform into a bird and fly high above the world, and secrets are revealed in due course. Puerto Lucas, another very long site. the picture on the left there gives you an idea of its length. So I'm standing at one end there, and some, I'd say 25 meters away is the other end of the panel, and the entire surface of that rock face is covered in motifs. Including some very strange things like this squiggly armed man here. He was a personal favorite of my collaborators. This double scrolled motif all over the place in northern South America, and anywhere you almost can't find a rock art site without these double scroll things here directly below the squiggly armed man. Interesting things like this has been this large thing here, which I reserve judgment on what it's meant to represent, but everybody has heard of Pablo Escobar's hippos that were released in Colombia. It's been suggested to be one of those. I'm a bit dubious, but there you go. And equally, it's some of these sites. Some parts of the panel are super hard to access. So looking up here, that's about a 5 or 6 meter climb, which I did by climbing up this tree to access and take photos of. So really cool site as well. Really big one. Here's another one from Cerro Azul, the so-called Danta's panel. Danta is the local name for the tapir, the Tapirus terrestris. This site is it's also one of the more accessible sites. So if you search the hashtag Cerro Azul on Instagram, you'll see people climbing up all over these rocks, which are actively falling away from the rock face to lay their grubby mitts all over the motifs. It's a super interesting site as well for some reasons that, yes, they're in the next slide. But this should sort of give you an idea of the scale of the sites that we're looking at. They're enormous, and you could spend a lifetime disentangling what it is exactly being depicted. But I want to focus in now on just some of the smaller details that you can sort of pick out quite easily from some of these. So Cerro Azul Danta is particularly good in this regard, with having what I would call little vignettes, little stories about what's going on. So in the top right here, top left here, this sort of processional walk, or processional figures in procession, if you like, around what may be either a rainbow, which features in again quite prominently in indigenous myth and cosmology, or it could be the Milky Way, the arm of the Milky Way in the night sky. This is something that this association between the rock art in this region and the Milky Way is something that Carlos Castaño Uribe has commented on quite extensively recently. He argues there's some sort of celestial alignment to the rock art. There are also this depiction up here of there are multiple interpretations of these sort of four-legged creatures with people in line below them. One school of thought has it that these are conquistadors and they're hunting dogs. So there are accounts of conquistadors entering the region and hunting down local indigenous people using their dogs, intended for slaving raids, essentially. The other interpretation is that it's people hunting jaguars. Again, the hunt of a jaguar, major prestige activity for some certain groups in the region. The jury's out. I don't really care in which direction it is on a personal level, but there you go. This one is quite nice, just below it with again, I like what I see here is a man playing fetch with his dog. That's what this says to me. I quite like it. It's a little cute. Again, continuing on with the cuteness, there's some sort of deer potentially with its child here. A little family scene, a human figure and then two smaller human figures next to it. Next to them, hopefully in a different location, a couple copulating. So there's erotic scenes in the rock art as well. And then similar to the, so we're moving clockwise here, similar to the potential hunting scene or dogs on a lead scene. There's also this depiction of either a person being leashed or lashed in some way, or being hunted by other figures. And then more depictions of shamanistic motifs, like the vulture or the falcon. This collection of motifs in the sidebar here is particularly interesting because this is a near life-size depiction, not near life-size, I'd say maybe half life-size depiction of a human figure, below which my colleague, Dr. Rios, conducted an excavation and encountered a human inhumation dating to about 3,000 years ago. So certainly we know that that is almost too good to be true, and I'm certainly comfortable thinking that the rock art is at least that old. I mean, that to me is just fantastic luck to find a human burial directly below where a depiction of a human is, surrounded by handprints from other people. I mean, that is almost as close to a smoking gun as you'll get in rock art research, I think. Right, so that's sort of some of the things that stand out to me in terms of sort of items of interest. What is also super interesting about the rock art, bearing in mind that some of these sites have been occupied since the Ice Age, is the presence of potentially Pleistocene megafauna. This is an area of research that has been much commented on, I think, in recent years, not least because of the efforts of my colleague Gaspar and his collaborators at the University of Exeter, Dr. Jose Iriarte and Mark Robinson, who have published so that they have a discussion of exactly this in the paper that I indicated earlier, the colonization of the Amazon one. So Megatherium or Eremotherium, the two different genuses, are potentially giant ground sloth. So there are some anatomical features here, such as the mouth and the number of claws and the positioning of the claws, sort of the positioning of the thumbs in particular speaks to this really being a depiction of a giant ground sloth. This is incredibly interesting, bearing in mind that this species may have been hunted to extinction by humans. Humans may have been a decisive factor in pushing them to extinction after the end of the Ice Age. And in addition to the environmental changes wrought by the Ice Age, the fact that there is a literal depiction of a man hunting, I mean, we know he's a man because there's a little penis there, hunting a Megatherium or a Eremotherium or animal like it, is just a great thing to contemplate. It's super interesting. Moving down to Hippidion or Equus, this definitely has the potential to be extinct American horse. Now, why do we say that? Overwhelmingly, across the globe, whenever horses are depicted in, let's say, indigenous or native rock art. Now, this goes for South America, this goes for North America, Mesoamerica, even Australia. Whenever horses are depicted, they are depicted with a rider because it's a crazy thing to witness, right? You've never seen, indigenous people have never seen anyone riding a horse before. In contrast, this one is riderless. There is no rider on this. In addition, it has this kind of robust head, as opposed to a gracile head that European horses are more known for. Whereas American horse has this kind of, Ice Age horse are much more compact in body structure and have a larger head relative to body size. So there is a good case in this case to argue for this being an extinct American horse, which the first inhabitants of South America may have likely witnessed. More tapirs. Another one that's sort of in my mind, potentially slightly more dubious is the paleo llama or the llama or vicuña. These are all genus names. These are not we're not identifying them down to species level, but certainly to the level above, to genus level. Why this is more dubious, in my opinion, is because hunter-gatherers, even post Ice Age hunter-gatherers, still very mobile people. There is a good chance that they may have come into contact with llama or vicuña after the Ice Age, whereas paleo llama that may have been extincted locally way before the end of the Ice Age. The jury's out on this one for me. But the really interesting one is Zenorhinotherium down there in the bottom right, which is a sort of camel-like creature that went extinct at the end of the last Ice Age as well, formerly distributed over much of northern South America. I think the closest paleontological site that has fossils of this, the closest and youngest paleontological site is in northern Venezuela, so not too far, all things considered. And remember that I mentioned earlier about anatomical detail being preserved in some of these paintings. Well, the interesting thing is that the Zenorhinotherium is depicted with this kind of nose, this sort of proboscis nose, like the tapir as well, but also these 3 toes. This is something that Professor Iriarte in particular has highlighted in recent work. This sort of three-toed foot, which is almost good enough to positively identify this beyond a shadow of a doubt. So bearing in mind that we have really old dates in an American context, really old dates for these sites in the Guaviare region in northern South America, that we can make a pretty positive assignation of certain species and certain genuses to some motifs, and that elsewhere in the tropics we have similar sites. There is a sort of impression emerging that actually the first inhabitants of South America may have left behind a pretty fantastic record of their passing. In sites like La Lindosa, in locations like La Lindosa, like Cerro Gavilan, like Cueva de las Manos, like Monte Alegre, and so on and so forth. So that to me is tremendously exciting. So that's the record itself and what is interesting and fascinating about it. I'm going to go back to my original, so this is kind of rewinding a little bit to part 1, where really what I was trying to do with my project is to zoom back out and look at all of this evidence in a comparative perspective. Now, what I mean by that is I've been collating all of these different rock art records made at different times and in different places by different people into a database, much like the Scottish Rock Art Project database as well, where I've been counting up everything that appears in each site. I've been classifying them by style, by content. I've been recording their geographical context, their spatial configuration, what they occur in relation to, what type of site it is. Is it painted rock art? Is it engraved rock art? And at present, I have a database of 121 sites, many more panels within those sites, thousands and thousands of motifs, which I counted individually on my own. Some sites are only recorded to sort of presence absence level because it speeds it up a lot. You can imagine sites like Cerro Azul, they just take forever to grind through if you want to count every single motif present in the sites. And part of this has been published in a journal called Arts. The paper is down there, Patterns of Style, Diversity and Similarity in Middle Orinoco Rock Art Assemblages. So that's looking in particular at the Middle Orinoco sample, for which I do have complete counts of motifs. It's open access, go check it out if this interests you. It's where some of the ideas I'm about to present first started to develop. So I've been going through this incredibly rich and diverse record and reducing it down into something that is manageable and I can get a handle on. So what I've been doing is looking at trying to classify all the different types of human figure that appear. Do they have body paint? Do they have internal subdivisions? Are they solid fill? Are they just wireframe? Are they stick figures? Things like that. These are the kinds of criteria that I've been using to sort of discern different stylistic choices on the part of the indigenous people that made the rock art. Lots of different kinds of circle. Again, I could go into exhaustive detail about this. I think one particular strength of the database is that this has been a solo effort. So if there are any biases or inconsistencies, at least they are consistently biased and consistently inconsistent, because I'm the only person who's been doing this on my own. Some of the classifications have this sort of slight Pokemon aspect to them, where scroll 1 is slightly more complex than scroll 2, which is more complex than scroll, or less complex than scroll 3, which is, and then goes into scroll 4. I don't mean to imply any sort of derivation between, I'm not saying that scroll 4 is derived from scroll 3. It's just, it's the fourth type of scroll I happen to encounter. Scroll 3 is the third type of scroll I happen to encounter. Ditto with spirals. It's just the order in which I encountered them in my huge database of imagery. And so there's no sort of implication, developmental or teleological implication from this. It's just as basic and baseline as it can possibly be. And the end goal of all this is to enable a sort of more systematic comparison of a highly diverse but nonetheless fairly consistent record. So despite the diversity, despite the extreme amount of variation that you see, I also believe that there is a decent amount of continuity, both in time and in space, between all of these different sites. Now, this is something that I think would I didn't see if she actually came into the room, but one of the members of the Scottish Rock Art Project, Joanna Valdez-Tullett, did her PhD thesis and much of her follow-on work on so-called Atlantic rock art, looking at commonalities between Iberian, Irish, Scottish, English rock art, and all of the ways in which these regional records share quite a lot of content, but have their own sort of sub-regional flavors or styles. And then this is something that I've been trying to replicate in my own way for the Orinoco record. By replicate or by analysis, I mean I'm using a family of methods derived ultimately from graph theory and physics called social network analysis, where we're trying to undertake, it's a collection of methods for representing interactions between individuals. Interactions in this case means the number of motifs that a site shares, the individuals being the sites themselves. So I'm undertaking analysis on a kind of site level, and I want to know how many motifs, what kind of motifs are shared between all of these different sites, and if there are clusters that emerge between them, or between subsets. Are some sites clustered in space? Are some sites only clustered in terms of their content, and so on and so forth. We want to understand how things are related and what are interesting about these relationships. So I'm going to show you some really exploratory work. I've been working on this on and off. In 2020 I started a new job as a lecturer, and that among the other responsibilities I've had to do for that job, it's taken time away from my research. So this is kind of very preliminary and hasn't advanced much since the last time I gave a talk on this subject, all the way back in late 2019. So forgive me if some of you have seen this before elsewhere. So this is, I've undertaken a bunch of different analyses on this network. So each point here is a rock art site. I have thresholded, so I've defined relationships between them based on the number of motifs. So a number of motifs they have in common. So if two sites have a link, that means that they share a motif. At least one motif. There are. I've restricted the analysis to depictions of humans and animals for reasons that will become clear in just a second. Even so, if you plot all of the relationships, this becomes an almighty mess. It just becomes a mass of a huge spaghetti monster. You can't really see any relationships easily. So what I've done is I've thresholded only the 5% of the strongest relationships. So only the links that are in the top 5% in terms of their strength have been retained, producing this network where there are some local clusters sort of around the edges, and then these sites that are let's say not super connected, but they form the bridges between subsets, between individual clusters, these sort of bridging sites, if you like. We can add some more information to this by scaling the sites according to their richness. Richness is just an index of how many motifs are on there. So the bigger the site, the more diverse, if you like, the more different kinds of motifs are represented in them. So particularly on the right hand side here, you can see that this cluster of painted sites are highly diverse. They have lots and lots of different kinds of motifs, whereas these highly networked, highly clustered, lots and lots of interlinked engraved sites, they have many motifs in common within them, but they have motifs in common within them, but those motifs apparently don't occur anywhere outside of this cluster. Now, it's interesting to consider what that might be, and that's a subject for future research, I think. We can look into even more detail in terms of, so I'm still scaling the size of the nodes by the richness, but I've added another layer on top of this network. So the lighter the color, the more diverse the rock art. And diversity, as opposed to richness, is a measure that takes into account the sample size. So the larger sites are also more diverse. Now, this is perfectly in line with what we know about ecological diversity, from which these indices are derived ultimately. So along the bottom there, as the number of motifs increases, the diversity represented in the rock art increases asymptotically as well. And this mirrors what we know about ecological diversity itself, which is interesting to consider, I think. But another layer of information which I've added, which isn't here but is here, is that I've colored these points. These points are still representing individual sites. I've colored these points by their influence in the network. And what is interesting to consider is that the most influential sites, the ones that sort of occupy these bridging points in the network, the brokers, the information brokers, if you like, are often themselves not hugely either diverse and don't contain a huge number of motifs, which is interesting to think about in terms of network connectivity. So this is what it looks like if you color the network by PageRank is an algorithm developed by Google that it does what it says on the tin, right? It shows you what the most, when you perform a Google search, PageRank basically ensures that you'll get the site that you want based on the criteria that you enter into the search engine. It will draw forth the most highly networked, the most highly connected site based on the criteria that you feed it. In this case, in the network that I've used, it shows the light color, the yellow and the orange. The yellow and the orange ones, it just highlights their centrality to the network. So to get between these clusters, these relatively isolated clusters on the periphery of the network, you usually have to pass through these bridging sites, these so-called information brokers. that being said, to me, in addition to sort of this sort of topological view of the network, I think it's also interesting to consider what's going on the right-hand side here, with these really big sites, these big painted sites, which many of which we've just seen in the rest of in the earlier on in my talk, which if you project by their connectivity, sort of stand out even more. So along the x-axis, I've plotted their degree, so how many connections they have, and they're not terribly well connected. You know, in the overall scheme of things, they don't have very many links beyond their immediate clique. But they do have high richness. They're incredibly diverse, and this gels with what we know about the La Lindosa rock art. There are a lot of unique motifs because of their size. They have such not just the La Lindosa sites, but also the ones in Venezuela, the sites like Cerro Gavilan that I highlighted earlier. They are so big and have such a huge richness, such diversity of motifs, that they really only share motifs between themselves. They're some of the few places where things like Pleistocene megafauna are depicted. They are the few places where we have unambiguous depictions of plants, including cultivated or intensively managed plants. And that to me makes them even more interesting, right? It's fascinating to contemplate the time depth as well as the ecological information embodied within these sites. As opposed to the rest of the rock art record, which kind of hovers at the bottom of the graph there. In terms of what all of this actually means, I'm not quite there yet. I just kind of want to leave it there, but I want to leave you with some impressions. I want to know what in future I would really like to explore this idea of bridging sites. You know, what is the nature of these of the bridging sites? What makes them network brokers? What makes these old large sites in the Serranía de La Lindosa unique beyond their size? What are the motifs that really push them to the top of this graph in terms of richness? Are there trends in time or in space? And do these correlate with known ecological or biogeographical patterns? And before I go on, before I sort of wrap up, I would like to just sort of ruminate on the fact that it's only really possible to even contemplate questions like these by taking this very broad scale look at rock art data. You know, you remember we're only looking at the top 5% strongest connections, based on a sample of over 100 sites that I meticulously in exhausting detail cataloged. And really, by taking this zoomed out look at big data, can we start thinking about the interesting patterns that emerge once you start teasing out the details, picking at the details and plotting and replotting and reworking, considering it in a different light, which I hope wasn't too much or too confusing. But in terms of biogeographical patterns, I think it is really interesting, first of all, to think about, well, if Pleistocene ecological relationships are depicted in the rock art, first of all. Second of all, it's interesting to consider where La Lindosa is located in biogeographical terms. So it's right there on the border between savanna, northern South American savanna, and the tropical rainforest of some of the wettest tropical rainforests in the world, in the northwestern Amazon. It's also along an elevation gradient. So as you to the east, there's the Andes, where you might encounter things like Lama or Vicuña, and then towards the east, it declines into the Orinoco basin, into the Orinoco lowlands. There is also this precipitation cline, which varied in time as well, and accordingly would also have changed the relative representation of savanna versus rainforest in the region on a sort of regional scale. Now, we know this from a number of pollen records that have been taken throughout the region, Loma Linda, Las Margaritas, El Pifial, Laguna Angel, and Laguna Sardinas. These sort of straddle the study region quite nicely. And there has been a general increase in forest over time. And I think what would be particularly interesting is looking at the relative representation of grazing creatures versus browsing creatures, creatures that live in perhaps more forested environment rather than the more open environment in which you would find grazers. So looking at biogeographical patterns in time and in space is something that I think can be quite useful, and particularly with artistic information. There has been some quite significant success in this regard, particularly in ancient Egyptian art and in the Arabian Peninsula in recent years. So it would be really fun, I think, to extend this kind of approach to a neotropical context. I'm all about that. So in summary, everything we know about the ethnography, the archaeology, the ethnolinguistic record points to a high cultural diversity in the pre-Columbian period, and rock art certainly is no exception in that regard. That being said, I think that the overall diversity can be contraposed with quite a high degree of stylistic consistency. If I'm honest, every time I look at an existing record or visit a new site myself, I go, I've seen that before. That looks like something in Venezuela, in northern Brazil. This is a motif that I've seen elsewhere, often several motifs that I've seen elsewhere, which to me speaks of sort of a shared vocabulary, a shared symbology around the production of rock art. And which actually has been quite satisfying quite validating, really, to study often. I may have been onto something when I started studying the rock art of Northern South America. But ultimately, to answer the kinds of questions I'm interested in, we really need more data synthesis. We need to cast an even wider net. I hope to go back into the field in the next 12 months, COVID permitting. We need more paleoecological data. We need more environmental data, and we need to bring this together using computational modeling. I think I've probably gone on for long enough. I can sense I'm getting bored of my own voice. Who thought it could happen? And I just want to end on thanking all of my collaborators, particularly the ones in Colombia who made the fieldwork possible, Don Nelson and his family, Don Barbas, Don Noé, the people of Guaviare Department, all of my funders, all of my collaborators and colleagues who have made this possible, and not least to Scotland Rock Art and the Scotland Rock Art Project and Historic Environment Scotland for inviting me to give this. So I'll be more than happy to take any questions that may have arisen during the talk. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you very much, Phil. It's very fascinating. It's so rich, and it's great that you've managed to do all this already. And it sounds like you could spend at least 10 lives just working on this field work, if you survive the snakes, of course. Yeah, we have lots of questions. So I'm going to start by the first ones chronologically. So there's a question from Liz. You describe the paintings as geometric shapes and contrast them with representational. Is there any reason to believe that the geometric shapes are or are not representational? We use shapes as representational too, for example, a house shape. So, yes.
Yeah, so this is a great point. Of course, we use geometric shapes as representational, and in fact, there is every reason to believe that geometric shapes, in some regards, were representational of certain concepts or things in this region as well. So one of the publications that I highlighted in one of my first slides, the book is entitled Beyond the Milky Way by Reichel Dolmatov, Gerardo Reichel Dolmatov. He did lots and lots of fantastic ethnographic studies among Tucano and Macu people of Northern South America, and during this work he cataloged the meanings of geometric shapes in their art. Surprise, surprise, a lot of these motifs also appear in the regional rock art record. However, a lot of the motifs have distributions far beyond the people that they studied. So although they may have like specific meanings or represent specific things among the people that he studies, I am personally not okay with sort of taking that information from one part of this huge and massively culturally diverse region that has been lived in for 12,000 years unbroken, and imposing those meanings on a completely different context where different people live, where they speak a different language, live in different ways to the Tucano people that he studied. So although attempts have been made to correlate specific motifs, what they mean to people in the ethnographic present and projecting it back in time, I am personally not that okay with that. So yes, they may represent things. It's just my professional opinion on that matter. You could go down that rabbit hole, but I choose not to. But thank you for your question.
Thanks, Phil. There's actually another question from Liz, which is more about the heritage aspect and how to preserve it. So the question is, I understand completely the issue with people crawling all over the sites. What do you consider we should do with them? Should is in, inverted commas, taking into account local financial issues and the need for preservation, but need for interest to maintain them?
Well, that's an interesting and multifaceted question. Until very recently, the Guaviare Department, the part of Colombia that I did my fieldwork in, was a conflict zone. The FARC were active in this region, and so because of this, historically, government presence has been quite minimal. It's only recently really been opened up for tourists, for people, researchers to access, and even still, you have to tread on eggshells in many cases. What I'm getting at is that there isn't a park ranger service. There isn't, although Chiribiquete is a UNESCO National Heritage Site, there isn't, a ranger station or a visitor center or even really a local administrative authority who can take these sites into under their protection. So you need to bear that in mind. This is a very rural, until recently, very conflict-riven part of the world. What should be done? Minimally, put up some fencing at least. I mean, at a minimum, just get some planks and put up a fence. Education, local education, outreach, talk to schools, but even so, a lot of the visitors are not locals. Locals are by and large quite, not very well off. The people who tend to visit and have the time to visit and take holidays to go to these sites are richer people from cities, from Bogota, from Medellin, from Cali. Conurbations in Colombia. They're not the locals. The locals are quite respectful and mindful of their heritage. They see it's a point of pride that these sites exist in their local environments. So what we should do, or there ought to be a larger presence of heritage bodies, but this is something that has to be resolved internally in Colombia. I think personally, it's not for me to say or to direct.
Thank you very much. I see there's another question by Carol, which is also related to a question I wanted to ask. So if I may take the privilege of asking my question here. There are some panels, including the very big one you've shown in the first part of your presentation. It struck me that many motifs look like they are very neatly organized together, which they look like, it could look like something that's been wholly planned, or at least that's something that is constructed nicely over maybe a certain time, but it contrasts with many rock art sites we know in the world which you have so much overlaps, and in some of the sites you've shown as well with the hand stances, they overlap a lot, or in the lower part.
We can go back.
Yeah, so I wonder, because it looks like in the upper part of the panel there's this very neat organization, and in the lower part it's much more, of course it's a bit damaged, and the ochre is a bit kind of split everywhere, but it looks like there's much overlap. So do you think there is some form of organization, or there's at least maybe some part, like the upper part of the rock art panel, have been planified in a way, or is this just resulting from maybe a more respectful development of rock art in that part of the panel, where everybody would add a motif every year or so, whatever, and respecting the other motifs? So yeah, what's your view on this?
Yeah, potentially that there's definitely an argument to be made for that, I think. So one work that I sadly forgot to mention, one by a North American anthropologist called John Greer. He surveyed a bunch of sites quite like this in the Middle Orinoco, and did exactly this kind of analysis of what is overlapping what. And he did this comparatively over many sites, and was able to sort of seriate, provide a sort of chronological, rough relative chronological framework for the rock art on the basis of this. That is something that I think would be really interesting to do for this record. It would be really cool to see which motifs are always respected and which ones tend to overlay other ones. Yeah, what comes first, what comes last. But you're right. I think you're right in pointing out that overall they do seem to be, maybe planned, or maybe sort of respected. Even if they're made maybe hundreds or even thousands of years apart, they seem to be respected. There's not sort of no smudging over or deliberately overlapping. Although we do see that as well. There are plenty of cases, particularly in let's go back, particularly in Nuevo Tolima, especially lower down. I mean, you can see that. Let's clear this up. Particularly lower down in the panels. So there may be an element of accessibility as well. Not everybody could climb as high as the people who executed the top motifs. It's an interesting question. I don't have an easy or straightforward answer to it, I'm afraid.
That's good. Thanks, Phil. There's an anonymous attendee who is asking whether the database is accessible online.
Yes. So the paper that I mentioned, let's see if I can find which slide it was again. This one, Patterns of Style, Diversity and Similarity in Middle Orinoco Rock Art Assemblages. That's the most up-to-date published version of my database. It contains it's the stylistic classification of all of the sites in the Middle Orinoco sample. I haven't been able to work on publish anything recently, but the plan is certainly to make it all accessible eventually, for sure. Yeah, and make 3D photogrammetric reconstructions available as well. So there's cross links between the imagery and the database itself. So yeah, I'm sorry the full thing isn't available, but part of it is to date. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Phil. And Linda has posted again the link to this article in the chat. So if everybody wants to have a look, the link is there. Right. So following up on the questions, another question from Carol is: were the animal forms deliberately placed to take advantage of the rock face in order to make them more 3D and realistic? So maybe it's a question that similar phenomenon that you would see, for example, in Upper Paleolithic rock art, where the natural rock inspires specific forms or strategy.
Yeah, for sure. I know exactly what that question is in reference to. Unfortunately, not. I have not seen anything like that personally. But I can't rule it out really. But in the sites that I visited, not really, no.
Thank you. A question from Finola, which is: what do the indigenous peoples of this area say about the rock art?
Okay, so that's a complicated question, because there are many indigenous peoples in this area. The people that I have worked most closely with are a group called the Piaroa, who live in the Middle Orinoco. I haven't interacted very much with indigenous people in Colombia, but in Venezuela, I had the privilege of working with the Piaroa, also called the Wotua. They're autonym. They call themselves the Wotua. They have a fantastic oral tradition of how to best describe it. Really, it's like they appropriate the whole landscape through their stories. You know, it's a bit, you know, you can ask them about the rock art, and they won't tell you about the rock art. They'll start telling you about, well, so there's this mountain over there, and then next to this mountain is a river, and there's a story about this river and about the village in the river. The villagers came from another place, and eventually, you know, it just goes on and on and on and on, and it becomes this sort of all-encompassing story that is sort of tangentially related to the rock art, but really is this kind of cosmovision of the world, and it's fascinating and really, really interesting to listen to. Rock art in these stories often figures as sort of they're often, so in the Middle Orinoco, the rock art is often in quite high places in the landscape, so in sort of up on cliff faces, up quite far removed from where people live, and because of this, they are taboo areas. They're not areas you necessarily want to approach because they're potentially dangerous. They may contain spirits or ancestors that you need to pay the proper respect to. Right? It's not something that is necessarily always safe to visit. That being said, some of the largest and most interesting sites that I had the privilege of recording in the Middle Orinoco are right next to a huge settlement site that was occupied for 500 years, if not more. So clearly, like this taboo wasn't always in place. There are another thing that comes out quite strongly, I think, is that. So the Piaroa are one group, the Wothwa are one group. Another sort of large ethnographic grouping are Arawak-speaking peoples. Now, a particular feature of Arawak groups is their propensity to migrate and spread over time. And there's lots of village, at least historically, there's lots of village fissioning, where a village will split out from its parent village and travel down. And this is mirrored in mythological cycles, and often these mythological cycles refer to specific locations that are marked by rock art. And they have there's I think it was Reichel Dolmatov recorded a rock art motif that purportedly is where the world was created. It's where their origin myth came from. The Piaroa have nothing like this. So this is just two examples among the hugely varied peoples of the Orinoco and northwestern Amazon. So I can go on for hours telling you all these different things, but the truth is the indigenous people say all sorts of things, and they're all equally fascinating.
Thank you, Phil. One question from Andras. I was hoping that you would elaborate a bit more on the identified styles and any observed relative chronologies, especially those in relation to the purported megafauna, which to me appears to be amongst the topmost, thus most recent, layers. Is there any observable stylistic sequence from the published photos I see known?
So yeah, this goes back to what I was saying about John Greer's work. I would love to have a PhD student or a postdoc replicate his efforts in the Guaviare in La Lindosa. Do something similar to what he achieved for the Middle Orinoco, perhaps comparatively. Unfortunately, at present, no, there is no relative chronology. It might help to go back to the depictions of megafauna. Yeah, I mean, most recent. I don't know. The horse is overlain perhaps by weathering or ochre that has been added later. But I mean, yeah, they mostly stand apart. I mean, it's not easy to see relative sequencing with these particular motifs. Maybe with a tapir, but tapir is there's something on top of the tapir here, but this is the tapir still exists in the region today. It's not an extinct megafauna. It's just megafauna. It's just megafauna that happens to be around in the Pleistocene, but is still present today. Yeah, I don't. I suppose I should answer in the negative. No, there is no stylistic sequence at the moment, unfortunately, and I'm sorry about that.
No, that's fine. There's also a similar question from Sheila, who's asking as regards dating whether found, for example, any hearth with charcoal residues that could give a clue. And that's the no question. But I suppose that the question is, was there any excavations related to your rock art sites?
Yeah, so the slide I had very early on, I appreciate that was a while ago, but the slide I had on the regional archaeology was an excavation in Cerro Azul, in front of one of the panels that has it's one of the largest panels, is what I'm trying to say. And what they dated, I can't remember off the top of my head whether they dated hearths. What they did date, I know for certain, are seeds. They dated paleobotanical remains. Now, seeds are excellent things to date, because if you collect wood, if you chop down a tree to make firewood, you might potentially be burning quite an old tree. Old trees have old carbon in them, which might give a misleading date. Seeds grow annually, or at least semi-annually, so that they have young carbon in them. They have recent carbon in them, and because of this, seeds give a very tight range of dates of calendar dates from the radiocarbon age. So what my colleague Gaspard, what my colleague Jose and Mark have been doing are dating paleobotanical remains wherever possible, and that these are the dates these are the samples that have produced ages of up to the end of the last ice age. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you very much, Phil. So maybe one last question, because I'm aware it's almost 7.
Oh, wow.
A question from Leans. Are these rock art sites live sites, in that are people still updating them like Aboriginal art?
That's an easy one. To my knowledge, no. So even going back as far as Alexander von Humboldt's travels, so he traveled through the Orinoco in 1798, I want to say. He published his book in 1810, but it was certainly the end of the 1700s he traveled through the region. Even that early, people weren't making rock art. The indigenous people that he spoke to didn't know who had made it. The rock art that he observed, they didn't know who had made it. It was sort of ancestors. It was abstracted. It was so far in the past, or unrelated to the people that he spoke to, that it was unknown. The example that I gave of the Piaroa, who have this kind of, it's quite fascinating, this cultural tendency to just make everything about them in the region. It's really interesting, is even they don't know who made the rock art. It's just kind of, it's theirs, but it's not made by them, if that makes sense. Yeah. So yeah, no, we don't know.
That's great, Phil. So thank you everybody for attending and for all the questions. There was no time to address all of them, unfortunately, but I tried to make a selection. So thank you so much, Phil, for such a fascinating talk, and I really hope that you managed to do some more research and get an army of PhD students and postdocs to do some more research, because clearly there's scope for so much things to be done there. So thank you so much. And just before we conclude, I just wanted to inform everybody about our next webinar, which is going to be on Monday, the 29th of November at the same time and the same place. The talk will be from Professor Margarita Diaz-Andreu from the University of Barcelona, and the talk will be on sounding rock art landscapes, some results of the Art Soundscape project. Right, so that's all for tonight. Thank you very much, folk, and many thanks again, Phil, for such a brilliant talk.
Thank you very much for having me, and good luck with the end of the project.
Thank you.
Cool. Will I leave? Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen at the very least. There we go. Cool.